Hello, Psych 101 students. Welcome to Module 5, Chapter 8, Learning Objective 9. What is intelligence? So, psychologists really can't agree on a precise definition of intelligence, but most would agree that intelligence has something to do with the capacity to understand hypothetical concepts, which is known as abstract thinking. Most also agree that intelligence includes the abilities to learn to adapt to novel environmental circumstances, the ability to acquire knowledge, and the ability to benefit from experience. Your textbook's definition shown here includes some of these ideas, but this definition is a bit of a hodgepodge list of what intelligence is used for rather than a precise definition of what it is. But we'll go with this definition for now. Intelligence is the ability to use knowledge to reason, make decisions, make sense of events, solve problems, understand complex ideas, learn quickly, and adapt to environmental challenges. Uh, so IQ scores um, are known to reveal intelligence, and it was Alfred Binet who created the first intelligence test back in 1904. It's now, well, it was, originally known as the Binet-Simon intelligence scale. It's now referred to as the Stanford-Binet IQ test, one of the most popular IQ tests. And this was after Stanford University translated Binet's original test to English, and then they have done revisions on it over the years. And actually, they're the only organization that does revisions, and so it's been many years that it's been the Stanford Binet IQ scale. Uh, in the what IQ stands for is intelligent quotient. It's a mathematical measure of intelligence originally computed by dividing a child's estimated mental age. So you estimate the mental age by the result on the test, and you divide that by the child's chronological age. How old are they? And then you multiply that number by 100. So if to write out the formula, it would be MA over CA, so mental age over chronological age, and then you times that fraction by 100. So for example, let's say that a 10-year-old child, took Binet's original test, and his scores were similar to the average for 11-year-olds. So his mental age would be 11, how he performed on the test. His actual age is 10. So you would have 11 over 10 times 100, and that would equal an IQ of 110. So this original formula for IQ is what led to IQs having an average of 100. Because like most 10-year-olds are going to have a mental age of 10 years old. So you would have 10 over 10 times 100, which would be 100. Just like, an average 5-year-old is going to have a mental age of 5 years old. So the average was set way back then to be 100, and still today, all major IQ tests, you know, have an average of 100, um, and so the population has an average IQ of 100. Um, so this formula I gave you, mental age over chronological age times 100, well, because the test was originally meant and used for children, this formula made sense. It made sense to say, oh, this 10-year-old thinks like a 11-year-old or a 12-year-old. Like you say, oh, that's intelligent. And but after we started using IQ tests with adults, the concept of mental age over chronological age didn't really make sense anymore. Because let's say you were a 50-year-old and you took an IQ test and it showed that you have an IQ of 110. Well, using that formula, it'd be like, oh, this is a 50-year-old who thinks like a 55-year-old. I mean, mental age would end up being 55 for that 50-year-old. Like, well, that doesn't mean, is that a good thing or a bad thing to be 50 and think like a 55-year-old? So it didn't really make a lot of sense to talk about mental age versus chronological age when you started testing adults. And so we don't really conceive of that of it being of use. We don't really use that particular formula anymore. But we maintain that IQ tests have an average of 100. That the average IQ is 100. Okay, let's go on. Charles Spearman, he found positive correlations among items on IQ tests. So, like, he found that people that did well on one type of questions, let's say like they did really well on vocabulary items, well, they also tended to do well on other types of questions like spatial ability questions or verbal reasoning questions. People doing poorly on one type of questions often did poorly on other types as well, which is what led to a positive correlation. Like people tended to perform well on, different types of items, or they did, and perhaps all of them, or they tended to perform poorly on all of them. And this led to Charles Spearman concluding that we have one general intelligence. So it's the idea that one general factor underlies intelligence. So your one general intelligence would influence your mathematical ability, as shown in the diagram here, your writing ability, your problem solving ability, your drawing ability. That your general intelligence influences all of your mental abilities. There is now substantial evidence that a single factor of general intelligence is universal for humans across cultures. So Raymond Cattell saw general intelligence as composed of two types of intelligence. Fluid intelligence represents working memory processes and information processing that allow us to think quickly and flexibly. It is the capacity to learn new ways of solving problems. Whereas crystallized intelligence pertains to information in long-term storage, such as knowledge gained through experience, including knowledge about vocabulary and spelling. So it's basically the accumulated knowledge of the world that we gain over time. While most psychologists agree that we have a general intelligence, some also believe that we can characterize intelligence as having different aspects to it, such as creativity, which is the ability to come up with novel ideas to produce successful outcomes. It's useful for solving problems, communicating ideas, and entertaining ourselves and others. Yeah. To assess creativity, psychologists use tests of divergent thinking, which is the ability to generate multiple ideas or solutions to a problem. Example would be the invention of smartwatches was very creative. However, what we tend to teach in school is more conventional thinking, which is known as convergent thinking. It's the ability to generate the single best or most correct solution to a problem or question. When you take tests in school, typically there's one right answer. So example would be, watches have one use. They're useful for telling time. As an example, the difference between the two types of thinking. In convergent thinking, you would use duct tape as it was intended to mend or seal ducts. In divergent thinking, you might use the duct tape more creatively, such as in this picture here, maybe by making an outfit for the prom. And probably you have found creative uses for duct tape, as many people have. Yeah. Howard Gardner, he theorized that people have many types of intelligence that are independent of each other. In his original theory, Gardner proposed 8 different intelligences, which he called frames of mind. That is, like, they're different ways of thinking about the world. The list of the 8 intelligences that he included in his original theory are listed below here. Bodily, kinesthetic, linguistic, mathematical, logical, spatial, musical, interpersonal and intrapersonal and interpersonal are two types in his list. Intrapersonal is insight into yourself. Interpersonal is knowing how to interact effectively with others. And then finally, naturalistic intelligence. These were his 8 original intelligences that he proposed. There has been mixed scientific reaction to this model, as it's virtually impossible to falsify, meaning that there's no study you can do that would prove it wrong. Also, it's not clear why only certain abilities classify as intelligences, and people have argued about certain choices he made. Like for example, isn't bodily kinesthetic ability more about athletic skills rather than any mental activity? A lot of people think so. There's no good evidence that these intelligences are truly independent. Uh, you know, some have said that perhaps they're all just different manifestations of your one general intelligence, and that they're not really separate intelligences. Another multiple intelligence theory comes from Robert Sternberg, who theorized that we have 3 largely distinct types of intelligence. He believes that having one type does not ensure that you have the others. He called his model the triarchic model, or the triarchic theory. Let me go through the 3 types they included. Analytical intelligence is the ability to reason logically, or it's what we might call book smarts. It's what we learn in school, and it's what's tested in IQ tests. Practical intelligence is the ability to solve real world problems, or what we might call street smarts. This would include things like being able to size people up, social intelligence, the ability to get ahead in a job, etc. Things that you use in real life situations. Um, Creative intelligence is the ability to come up with novel and effective answers. You know, um, this would include skills like composing a poem or a piece of music, for example. Yeah. It there's a newer proposal that has been studied quite a bit recently, and it's the concept of emotional intelligence as being a separate form of intelligence. It includes 4 abilities: managing our own emotions, using our emotions to guide our thoughts and actions, recognizing other people's emotions, and understanding emotional language. This is somewhat similar to a combination of intrapersonal and interpersonal intelligence, from Gardner's theory, and in Sternberg's triarchic theory, emotional intelligence would be a part of his practical intelligence component. So I mean, it's not brand new. I mean, it's in a sense it was kind of included in those original ones, but as a separate intelligence, it has been, like I said, it's been studied quite a bit recently, and there's a lot of evidence that this may be a distinct type of intelligence that's somewhat different from our general intelligence. Here's a nice little summary of the different theories of intelligence we've looked at. So this is on page 326. I'm not going to go through it, but it's a good chart to be looking at when you're studying and trying to keep these different ideas straight. So just make sure you do read it over. Okay, let's go on. So we're coming to behavioral genetics now. It's let me first define it. It's a study of genetic and environmental influences on our behavior, basically nature and nurture. So, for example, is your intelligence mainly due to your genetics, what you inherited from your parents, or is it mainly due to environmental influences such as your upbringing? Behavioral genetics mainly relies on twin adoption and family studies. So add family studies to that list on the overhead there. This graph shown here represents average IQ correlations obtained from family adoption and twin studies. Siblings raised together show more similarity than siblings raised apart, or siblings who were adopted and raised together. This is the first three bars. So if you're brother and two brothers or brother and sister or two sisters, whatever, in a family, you're going to be closer in your intelligence than if you were raised separately, or if you compare two adopted siblings. This certainly shows that there's some environmental influence, because if it was all about genetics, then it shouldn't matter whether you're raised together or raised apart. But we can see that siblings, in the first bar, siblings raised together, they end up with more similar IQ than those that get raised apart. So that says that there's some influence of your upbringing and your environment. However, as shown by the red and blue bars on the right, the highest correlations are found among identical twins, whether they're raised in the same household or not. Those are the two biggest bars. Identical twins raised together is the big red bar. Identical twins raised apart, they're not far behind. So overall, the greater the degree of genetic relation is, the greater the correlation in intelligence. As you probably know, identical twins share 100% of their genetics, and this is what leads to them having very similar intelligences. So this kind of points to genetics being a very important factor. But even in those identical twins, we can see the influence of environment as well, because the identical twins that are raised together are more similar than the identical twins raised apart. So this once again shows that environment is a contributing factor to your intelligence. So let's take a look at some environmental factors that affect intelligence. We'll start with poor nutrition. So malnutrition may lead to lower IQs. And also, there's some evidence that intake of high fat and high sugar foods during childhood it's linked to slightly lower IQ scores. So nutrition is one of the factors. There's also prenatal factors. For example, the parents' intake of drugs and alcohol, uh, you know, when you were in your mother's womb. Um, Postnatal factors, afterbirth factors, such as your family social class, education, cultural beliefs, and your, the child or adolescent's own drug and alcohol use. Um, Poverty, some of these postnatal factors certainly have to do with poverty. What we have found, this is a very standard result from many studies, that poverty strongly influences IQ. The longer children live in poverty, the lower their IQs end up. So poverty has a very negative effect on intelligence. On the positive side, an enriched environment can aid in the development of intelligence. So parents can provide an enriched environment that will support the development of intelligence in their children. Good practices include reading books to children and providing children with intellectual opportunities from a young age. One other factor is birth weight. In the graph, you can see that IQ scores increase along with birth weight. So as you move from left to right, these are heavier babies, and they tend to end up with higher IQ scores. What is the reason for this? Well, birth weight may be considered a somewhat crude indicator of the developmental quality of the prenatal environment. Babies tend to end up being heavier when the mother has, has eaten proper nutrition during the pregnancy and avoided things like drugs and smoking and alcohol during the pregnancy. Whereas low weight babies are more associated with mothers that perhaps haven't taken the right prenatal vitamins or had right or good prenatal nutrition, or they've smoked or drank or done drugs. And this is why you tend to see higher intelligence with heavier babies. And once again, it's at least a crude indicator of a mother, that the mother has provided a good prenatal environment. So as a conclusion, there is substantial evidence that both genetic and environmental factors interact in their contributions to a person's level of intelligence and their achievement outcomes. And that is the conclusion of learning objective 9.